Welcome to Dark Tales. Before the nightmare begins, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you dare. Leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Now, turn off the lights, lock your doors, and let us dive into tonight's horrifying stories together. Story 1. The Phantom Wards of Blackwood Hill. The road to Blackwood Hill had long been swallowed by creeping briars and suffocating fog. High above the valley floor stood the ruinous silhouette of St. Jude Asylum, its jagged slate roofs cutting into the bruised twilight sky. Locals in the valley below never dared gaze upward after nightfall. They claimed the fog did not descend from the heavens, but rather breathed outward from the asylum's shattered windows, carrying the scent of damp lime, rusted iron, and forgotten agony. Tonight, an investigator named Julian arrived at the rusted gates, seeking answers buried half a century ago.
The heavy iron gates gave way with a mournful shriek that echoed across the hillside. Julian stepped through the overgrown courtyard, where stone gargoyles leaned crookedly from moss-choked pedestals. The air turned sharply cold, crystallizing his breath into faint white vapors. He felt unseen eyes watching his every move from the dark recesses of the masonry. In his hand, the beam of his vintage brass lantern flickered violently, casting long, trembling, spider-like shadows against the damp cobblestones. Something was awake within the perimeter, disturbed by the intrusion of living breath.
The main double doors hung ajar, swollen with decades of rain and decay. Julian crossed the threshold into the grand reception rotunda. A grand staircase swept upward into absolute darkness, its mahogany banisters rotted and warped like ancient rib cages. Upon the cracked mosaic floor lay scattered patient intake ledgers, their yellowed parchment pages curled like dried autumn leaves. The silent atmosphere was heavy, suffocating, and reeked of stale medicinal ether. A low, rhythmic tapping echoed from the corridor above, like fingernails tapping against a cold iron radiator. Julian crouched to examine one of the moldering files. The ink was faded, yet the frantic handwriting remained legible. Patient 404 refuses to acknowledge her reflection, insists the mirror eats her thoughts. Beneath the note was a crude charcoal sketch of a hollow-eyed face surrounded by crimson coils. A sudden draft swept down the hall, rustling the papers in a chorus of dry whispers. The temperature plummeted further. When Julian stood, his flashlight illuminated a series of dark, bare footprints trailing out from the darkness and vanishing right before his boots. He followed the corridor toward Ward B, the former wing for chronic sleeplessness. The plaster walls were peeling away in long, parchment-like strips, exposing the wooden lath beneath like fractured bones. Every few yards, heavy reinforced doors stood locked with thick brass padlocks, except for room 13. The door stood wide open, its interior completely engulfed in unnatural, pitch-black gloom. Julian shone his lantern into the cell. Nailed to the center of the wooden floor was a single rusted iron chair, fitted with heavy leather restraints that were worn and freshly strained. As Julian stepped into room 13, the heavy oak door slammed shut behind him with the force of an explosion. The iron latch clicked firmly into place. He lunged at the handle, twisting it violently, but the mechanism refused to budge. The silence in the room became absolute, a deadening void that pressed painfully against his eardrums. Then, softly, from the dark corner behind the chair, came the sound of labored, shallow breathing. The air smelled of burnt hair and copper. Julian held his breath, slowly turning his trembling lantern toward the corner. There was nothing physical in the corner, yet the shadows there appeared denser, vibrating like agitated liquid. On the wall above the chair, deep scratch marks formed frantic tallies, counting hundreds of days. Julian noticed that the scratches were freshly etched into the dry lime plaster, small white dust particles still drifting downward through the air. A cold draft brushed the back of his neck, accompanied by a faint whisper directly into his ear. "The doctor will see you now." Julian spun around, but the cell remained utterly empty. With a sudden shudder, the lock disengaged on its own, and the door creaked outward. Julian hurried into the corridor, his heart pounding in his chest. But the corridor was no longer the same. The decay seemed to have retreated slightly, replaced by flickering gas lamps that hissed softly along the walls. The smell of ether was overpowering now. In the far distance, down the endless line of arched doorways, he saw a tall figure in a dark frock coat carrying an antique leather medical satchel, walking away with a rigid, unnatural gait. Compelled by a grim curiosity, Julian followed the figure. The floor beneath his feet transitioned from cracked tiles to polished dark wood that groaned under his weight. As he passed consecutive doorways, he heard distinct sounds from within. Frantic pacing, weeping, the clinking of metal utensils, and frantic muttering in forgotten dialects. Yet whenever he peeked through the small observation grates, he saw only dark, empty rooms choked with cobwebs. The past was bleeding into the present, replaying the institution's darkest hours upon the fabric of reality. The corridor ended at the entrance to the surgical amphitheater. Double swinging doors with circular wire mesh windows stood before him. Julian pushed them open gently. The circular theater rose in tiers of steep wooden benches, designed for observing surgeons of a bygone era. At the center of the room, illuminated by a massive glass skylight battered by cold rain, stood an iron operating table, equipped with drainage troughs and thick leather straps. Surrounding the table were rusty stands holding tarnished bone saws, forceps, and heavy surgical needles. Sitting upon the tiered benches were dozens of shadowy, translucent figures. They sat in perfect, terrifying posture, their featureless faces turned down toward the center table. Julian froze, his muscles locking in primal terror. Not one of the spectral spectators moved, yet the collective weight of their gaze was almost physical, pressing down like lead. In the center, the figure of the doctor stood over the table, holding a long, slender instrument. The phantom turned his head around completely, rotating 180 degrees to face Julian. The doctor had no face, only a smooth, pale expanse of skin where eyes and mouth should have been. A sound resonated directly inside Julian's mind, a harsh scratching like metal against slate. "You are late for your procedure, Julian." The specter raised its hand, pointing a slender finger toward the vacant operating table. All at once, the spectators in the stands stood up in unison. Their garments rustled like dry parchment. Julian stumbled backward, throwing his weight against the swinging doors, bursting back into the hallway in desperate retreat. Julian ran through the corridors, but the layout of the asylum had twisted into a labyrinth of impossible geometry. Hallways stretched on for miles, sloping steeply downward. The gas lamps flickered wildly, casting chaotic, monstrous shapes along the mold-stained walls. Behind him, the rhythmic, synchronized footsteps of many feet echoed relentlessly. They were not running, they were marching with cold, unhurried precision. Every doorway he passed was now wide open, each room revealing dark silhouettes standing by their beds, waiting for him to pass. He turned a corner and found himself at the edge of the hydrotherapy ward. Rusted iron bathtubs sat in long rows across a sunken tiled floor, connected by a tangle of corroded overhead pipes. Thick, murky water sat stagnant in several tubs, bubbling softly as though boiling from below. Julian tried to slow his breathing, pressing his back against a tiled pillar. The water in the nearest tub stirred, and a pale hand emerged slowly from the black liquid, grasping the porcelain rim with long, discolored fingers. Julian bolted across the slippery floor, leaping over pipes and avoiding the grasping shadows. He reached a narrow spiral staircase that plunged down into the asylum's sub-basement. The air grew damp and suffocatingly hot, carrying the pungent odor of coal ash and scorched iron. This was the furnace room, the heart of the sanitarium's heating system, where incinerators had consumed decades of contaminated refuse. In the center stood a colossal iron furnace, its grates glowing with a dull, malevolent crimson light from fires that had never died. Upon the furnace door, embossed in soot-stained brass, was a plaque commemorating the lost souls of the 1928 ward fire. Julian remembered the town legend. The fire had not been an accident, but an intentional purge enacted by the chief doctor when his illegal experiments were discovered. The screams had been muffled by the thick stone foundations. As Julian stared at the plaque, the shadows around the boiler began to coalesce. The walls seemed to weep black soot, forming shapes of pleading hands reaching from the brickwork. The temperature rose to a blistering heat. Behind him, the staircase was blocked by the faceless doctor and the silent congregation of patients. They stood crowded upon the iron steps, shoulder to shoulder, gazing down into the basement with unnatural stillness. "You cannot leave until the record is complete," the mental voice echoed. "You came seeking the truth of Blackwood. The truth requires your permanence." Julian backed against the stone wall, feeling around frantically with his fingers until he touched an old ventilation shaft hatch, its rusted hinges loose. With an adrenaline-fueled heave, Julian ripped the iron grating free. He threw his lantern into the shadows to distract the advancing phantoms and crawled headfirst into the narrow, soot-caked ventilation duct. The shaft was freezing cold, a sharp contrast to the scorching cellar. Behind him, long, pale fingers scraped along the inside of the metal tube, clawing at his boots. Julian crawled on his elbows and knees in pitch darkness, coughing on accumulated dust, propelled forward only by sheer terror and the primal will to survive. The duct tilted sharply upward. Julian saw a faint glimmer of moonlight through an external exhaust grate ahead. He kicked furiously against the darkness behind him, feeling cold hands brush his heels before losing their grip. With one final, desperate thrust, he shattered the decaying iron bars of the external exhaust and tumbled outward into the damp autumn leaves on the hillside. He rolled down the muddy embankment, gasping for the clean night air, rain washing the soot from his trembling skin. Julian scrambled to his feet and ran down the hill, never once looking back until he reached his car at the valley edge. When he finally dared to glance in the rearview mirror, he saw the grand silhouette of St. Jude Asylum standing silent in the mist. Every single window across its 5 massive floors was now illuminated with a pale crimson glow. And standing in the highest tower window, a lone, tall silhouette raised a hand in a slow, patient wave. Blackwood Hill had not let him go. It was merely waiting for his inevitable return. Story 2. The Whispers of Hollow Thorn Wood. Deep in the northern valleys lay Hollow Thorn Wood, an ancient forest untouched by axe or plow for centuries. The trees here grew unnaturally close, their gnarled black boughs weaving together overhead into a dense canopy that choked out the sun. No birds nested within its perimeter, and no deer wandered past its mossy border stones. Those who lived near the woods warned their children that the trees possessed ears and voices, that the rustle of leaves was never caused by wind, but by the hungry murmurs of things older than human memory. A young herbalist named Clara had ventured beyond the stone markers at dusk, searching for the rare nightshade lichen said to grow only on the roots of Hollowthorn's center. She carried an oil lamp and an iron sickle, believing old superstitions were merely tales for timid minds. But 3 steps past the boundary, the ambient sounds of the outer world died instantly. The wind outside ceased, replaced by a profound, suffocating silence. Even the soft crunch of her boots upon the decaying pine needles sounded muted, like footsteps muffled under deep water. As Clara walked deeper, the path behind her seemed to dissolve into thickets of black thorns that twisted outward like grasping fingers. The air was cold and sweet with the smell of wet rot and wild herbs. Then, the first whisper drifted past her ear. It was faint, soft as spider silk, speaking her name. Clara, Clara. She paused, raising her lantern high. The amber light caught the pale trunks of silver birch trees, but between the trunks, the shadows shifted with subtle intent, receding just beyond the edge of her vision. She told herself it was only the wind whistling through hollow wood, but there was no wind to stir the air. She pressed forward, guided by an eerie intuition that pulled her toward the heart of the forest. The ground sloped downward into a sunken glen where ancient oak trees stood in a perfect circle. Hanging from their lowest branches were hundreds of crude figurines fashioned from dried twigs, black feathers, and knotted hair. They swayed gently in the still air, clacking against each other with the sound of chattering teeth. Clara approached the circle cautiously. In the center of the ring sat an ancient stone altar, its surface carved with spirals that seemed to writhe when viewed out of the corner of the eye. Growing around the altar's base was the nightshade lichen, glowing with a faint bioluminescent crimson pulse. It looked like living veins pulsating across the cold gray stone. Clara knelt and reached out with her sickle, but as the iron blade touched the plant, a sharp hiss resonated through the grove, and the lichen shrank away into the stone cracks. The whispers returned, no longer singular, but a multitude of voices overlapping in frantic rhythm. They spoke of lost travelers, forgotten names, and ancient hungers that slept beneath the roots. The voices emanated from the hollow trunks of the surrounding trees. Clara stood up quickly, clutching her lantern. The shadows between the oaks were stretching forward, extending long, clawed silhouettes across the damp earth toward her boots. She realized with mounting dread that the circle was not a place of worship, but a snare designed to lure the curious. Clara turned to flee the way she had entered, but the opening between the trees had vanished. Where the path had been, a solid wall of intertwined thorn briars now stood, their black spines glistening with dark sap. The whispers grew louder, chanting in unison. One who enters feeds the root. One who listens becomes the fruit. A chill crept up her spine as the ground beneath her feet began to soften, turning into a spongy, yielding mass that pulled at the heels of her boots like thick mire. Desperate, Clara used her sickle to hack at the thorny barrier. The briars shrieked as the iron cut through them, oozing a thick crimson sap that hissed upon contact with the dead leaves. With every vine she severed, 2 more sprouted in its place, weaving tighter and thicker. Above her, the twig effigies began to spin furiously on their twine cords, clicking like wooden locusts. A cold fog rolled in from the dark recesses of the wood, smelling of old earth, burnt sage, and ancient stagnant swamp water. Out from the mist stepped tall, emaciated figures, draped in cloaks woven from decayed leaves and moss. Their faces were concealed behind masks carved from pale birch bark, each mask bearing only hollow, round eye holes and a wide, carved smile. They carried crooked wooden staffs topped with deer skulls that glowed faintly with crimson light. They did not walk on the ground. Their feet hovered an inch above the moss, drifting forward in complete silence. They were the woodkeepers, the ancient guardians forgotten by the living world. The woodkeepers formed a ring around Clara, raising their staffs into the air. The whispers ceased, replaced by a deep, vibrating hum that made Clara's teeth ache and her vision blur.
The ancient oak in the center of the clearing began to split open down its trunk, revealing an interior that was not wood, but a dark, hollow cavern descending into the earth. From inside the trunk, a sweet, mesmerizing voice called out, "Come rest your weary bones, child of iron and sorrow. The forest will give you peace."
Clara felt an overwhelming drowsiness washing over her senses. Her arms grew heavy. The lantern fell from her hand, its flame guttering out in the damp moss. Her sickle slipped from her fingers. The voice from the tree was intoxicating, promising freedom from hunger, sorrow, and time itself. She took a step toward the split trunk, her eyes unfocused, her mind drifting into a dreamless fog. She saw faces embedded within the wood, faces of lost woodcutters and maidens from centuries past, their wooden features relaxed in eternal slumber. As she reached the threshold of the tree, a sharp pain pierced her foot. A fallen thorn had penetrated the leather of her boot, drawing a small bead of cold reality. The pain broke the hypnotic trance. Clara blinked, seeing the truth through the forest's illusion. The tree's interior was not a sanctuary of peace, but a pit lined with thorny tendrils, waiting to wrap around her limbs and pull her into the dark roots forever. The serene wooden faces were actually screaming in silent, eternal agony.
With sudden resolve, Clara reached down and snatched her iron sickle from the moss. In the folklore of her village, cold iron was the ancient bane of nature spirits and forest fiends. She drove the iron blade directly into the exposed heartwood of the splitting oak. A deafening, unearthly screech tore through the grove. The tree shuddered violently, spewing thick black sap from the wound. The woodkeepers recoiled instantly, clutching their masked faces as though the iron had burned their own flesh.
The forest's psychic grip shattered. The thorn wall behind her withered and collapsed into brittle dust, opening a narrow path back into the outer woods. Clara didn't hesitate. She pulled the sickle from the trunk and ran through the collapsing thicket. Behind her, the entire forest seemed to awaken in furious wrath. Massive roots burst from the earth like serpents, tearing across the moss to trip her. Branches snapped and whipped through the darkness, clawing at her cloak and tearing her skin.
The whispers were no longer seductive. They were screams of rage echoing from every trunk and stone. "Thief, trespasser, you belong to the soil." Clara kept her eyes fixed forward, refusing to listen. She held the cold iron blade before her like a talisman. The trees leaned in close, their canopy lowering to crush her, but whenever a branch touched the iron sickle, it recoiled with a hiss of steam, jarred by the touch of forged metal. She kept running, her lungs burning with every breath.
She entered the grove of silver birches. In the pale moonlight, the eye-like knots on the birch trunks were crying dark sap that dripped onto the forest floor like black tears. The birches bent their slender trunks across the path, attempting to weave a wooden cage. Clara swung her sickle with all her remaining strength, cutting through the weeping wood. The severed branches fell, writhing on the ground like wounded serpents, before turning to dry gray ash under her boots.
Ahead, the mist began to thin, and Clara saw the ancient mossy boundary stones that marked the edge of hollow thorn wood. Beyond them lay the open meadows of her village, bathed in gentle silver moonlight. But between her and the boundary stood the elder woodkeeper. The tall entity blocked the way, raising its deerskull staff. Its birch bark mask had split down the middle, revealing nothing underneath but an abyss of swirling crimson fog and two needle-sharp points of yellow light.
No one leaves with their soul intact. Give us the iron or become the earth. Clara didn't stop. She gathered every ounce of momentum and hurled the iron sickle directly into the center of the entity's fractured mask. The iron struck true. A blinding flash of pale crimson light erupted as the creature shattered into 1,000 dry leaves that scattered into the cold wind, shrieking as they dissolved into nothingness.
Clara leaped across the boundary stones, tumbling out onto the open grass of the meadow. The moment her body cleared the perimeter, the unnatural silence broke. The sound of real wind rushed through her ears. The chirping of crickets and the distant barking of village dogs flooded her senses. She lay in the grass, gasping for breath, looking back at the wall of black trees. Hollow Thorn Wood stood motionless once more, dark and indifferent beneath the silver moon, as if nothing had ever happened. Clara returned home and locked her doors, but her ordeal was far from over. Days later, as she sat quietly by her hearth, she realized a forest had left its mark. Whenever the wind blew through the chimney, she could still hear those gentle, seductive whispers in the draft. And when she looked closely at the wooden floorboards of her cottage, the knots in the pine seemed to slowly rotate their gaze toward her chair, waiting patiently for the day she would walk beneath the boughs once more. Story 3. The Sinister Glass in the Attic.
Inheriting Ravenwood Manor came with a strict condition left in his late grandfather's will. The attic door was to remain bolted and draped in black cloth until the property was sold. Arthur, a practical man of modern science, scoffed at such archaic superstitions. On his second night in the sprawling Victorian estate, plagued by insomnia and a restless curiosity, he climbed the narrow staircase to the third floor. In his hand, he carried a heavy iron crowbar and an old kerosene lamp, determined to inspect every corner of his new estate.
Arthur pulled down the dusty black shroud and wedged the crowbar into the old brass padlock. With a sharp snap, the lock gave way, and the door creaked open into a cloud of centuries-old dust. The attic was vast, filled with covered furniture, grandfather clocks that had stopped decades ago, and piles of decaying oil paintings facing the walls. In the furthest alcove, beneath a round, stained glass window, sat a full-length cheval mirror, standing over 7 feet tall, framed in intricately carved blackened silver that twisted into likenesses of weeping serpents. The mirror was draped in a heavy canvas sheet tied with hemp rope. Arthur cut the cord and pulled the canvas away. The glass beneath was flawless, devoid of dust or age tarnish, reflecting the dim room with eerie crystal clarity. Arthur stood before it, holding his lamp. But something in the reflection felt fundamentally wrong. The reflection of the attic appeared colder, darker, and the sheeted furniture in the glass seemed to have slightly different, more humanoid shapes beneath their cloths than the objects in the real room.
Arthur rubbed his eyes, blaming fatigue and the flickering kerosene flame. He looked back at his reflection. His mirrored self was staring directly at him, but when Arthur blinked, his reflection did not blink. When Arthur turned his head slightly to the left, his reflection remained facing forward, perfectly still, maintaining unbroken eye contact with a cold, mocking smirk that Arthur was not making. A sudden jolt of ice-cold panic shot through Arthur's veins, rooting him to the floorboards. Arthur stepped backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The reflection did not step back. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step forward toward the glass surface. Inside the mirror, the sound of boots on wood echoed clearly, even though Arthur stood completely still. The reflected room behind the doppelganger was changing. The sheeted shapes were rising to their feet, standing like tall, veiled mourners around the mirrored Arthur. The temperature in the attic plummeted.
Arthur grabbed the canvas sheet and tried to throw it back over the mirror, but as the cloth touched the glass, it vanished into the reflection, falling limply onto the mirrored floor on the other side. The reflection placed its hands against the glass from the inside. The glass didn't stop it. Instead, the surface rippled like dark liquid water under its fingers. A deep, hollow voice emanated from the mirror. "For 70 years I watched through your glass cage. Now you shall take my place in the dark." Arthur swung his iron crowbar with all his strength directly at the center of the mirror. There was a deafening sound of shattering iron, but the glass did not break. The crowbar shattered into iron splinters as if striking solid diamond. The shockwave knocked Arthur to the floor, sending his kerosene lamp rolling away. The lamp broke, spilling fuel across the floorboards, but instead of yellow fire, the flames burned with a cold, pale crimson glow that cast no warmth and threw impossible shadows upward toward the attic rafters.
The doppelganger pushed its head through the rippling surface of the glass. Its skin was gray and leathery, its eyes entirely black, with twin crimson embers glowing at their cores. It opened its mouth, releasing a breath of freezing, ancient air that smelled of ozone and damp tomb earth. Arthur scrambled backward on his hands and knees, terror overwhelming his senses. The entity pulled its torso through the frame, dragging itself into the physical world with a wet, tearing sound, like peeling wet parchment. Arthur reached the attic door and pulled it open, tumbling down the narrow wooden stairs. He fell hard against the second-floor landing, bruising his shoulder, but scrambled up and bolted toward the master bedroom. Behind him, the slow, rhythmic creak of attic stairs descended in heavy pursuit. Every clock in the mansion suddenly began to tick backward in frantic unison, their chimes ringing out in discordant, mournful tones that echoed through the dark corridors of Ravenwood Manor. Arthur rushed into his grandfather's study, slamming the heavy oak door and turning the brass deadbolt. He dragged a heavy mahogany bookshelf across the doorframe to barricade the entrance. His breath came in ragged, painful gasps. The room was dark, save for the pale moonlight filtering through heavy velvet curtains. In the corner stood his grandfather's antique glass-fronted curio cabinet, and on the desk sat a polished silver tea set. Everywhere Arthur looked, shiny surfaces reflected the dark room, and in every reflection, the entity was standing right beside him. Arthur recoiled from the desk, shutting his eyes in terror. The voice spoke again, this time echoing from all the glass panes in the cabinet. "You cannot hide from what you are made of. Every mirror in this house is an open door." The glass in the curio cabinet began to vibrate, cracking into spiderweb patterns that glowed with eerie crimson luminescence. On the desk, an old leather journal lay open. Arthur's grandfather had written his final entry in frantic ink-blotted script. "The glass requires a replacement. It cannot exist without a prisoner." The heavy oak door rattled violently as something slammed against it from the hallway. The mahogany bookshelf shifted, groaning under an immense supernatural pressure. Arthur read frantically. To banish the entity, the primary glass must be inverted, face to the earth, unbroken. Break the frame, and you free a legion. The entity slammed against the door again, the heavy wood beginning to splinter down the middle. Arthur realized with terrifying clarity that escaping the house was impossible. The only way to end the nightmare was to return to the attic. The study door gave way with an ear-splitting crash. As the dark silhouette crossed the threshold, Arthur leaped out through the side servant door that connected to the back stairwell. The rear stairs were narrow and spiraled all the way up to the attic rafters. He climbed 2 steps at a time in the suffocating darkness, his hands scraping against the rough plaster walls. Behind him, the air grew freezing cold as the entity pursued, drifting up the stairwell like a cloud of suffocating black smoke. Arthur burst through the servant hatch directly into the attic. The room was bathed in the pale crimson light of the floor fire, which had spread to circle the silver mirror. The mirror was now a swirling vortex of black liquid, pulling the surrounding air into its center with the force of a gale. Sheeted figures inside the reflection were clawing at the surface, their gray hands pressing against the ethereal boundary, threatening to spill outward into the attic in their dozens. The main attic door swung open, and Arthur's doppelganger entered, gliding effortlessly across the cold flames. Its form was taller now, its limbs elongated and unnatural, its fingers ending in blackened talons. "It is too late, Arthur," the doppelganger hissed, its voice reverberating through the roof beams. "The threshold is open. Ravenwood belongs to the glass." Arthur looked around wildly for anything he could use. Resting against the brick chimney was a heavy timber beam used during the manor's construction. Arthur sprinted past the reaching entity, dodging its talons by inches. The entity's swipe slashed through Arthur's coat, leaving a trail of freezing frost across his back.
Ignoring the searing cold, Arthur seized the heavy timber beam, wedging it beneath the ornate silver base of the standing mirror. He planted his boots against the floorboards and put all his body weight into the lever. "Face to the earth!" he screamed through gritted teeth, straining with every fiber of his being.
The entity shrieked in sudden, desperate terror, lunging forward to catch the frame. But the massive silver cheval mirror was too heavy. It tilted past its center of balance, groaning on its rusted pivots. As the glass angled downward toward the floorboards, the gravitational vortex inside reversed violently. A howling vacuum erupted from the frame, pulling the doppelganger backward with irresistible force. The creature clawed at the air, its elongated limbs stretching as it was dragged into its own reflection.
With a thunderous crash that shook the entire manor, the 7-foot mirror struck the attic floor face down. Miraculously, the glass did not shatter. Instead, the heavy silver frame sealed tightly against the thick floorboards with a dull, echoing thud. Instantly, the crimson flames extinguished into harmless white smoke. The gale-force winds died down to a dead calm. The freezing cold receded, replaced by the natural, dusty warmth of the old attic. The absolute silence of the night returned to Ravenwood Manor.
Arthur lay on his back, staring at the ceiling beams, his chest heaving as the adrenaline slowly drained from his limbs. Morning was breaking. The circular stained glass window began to filter gentle, golden dawnlight across the room. He hauled heavy iron weights, old trunks, and lead pipes onto the back of the fallen mirror, ensuring it could never be lifted or turned again. Finally, he covered the entire pile with the thick black canvas, nailing it firmly into the floorboards.
Arthur locked the attic door and threw the iron key into the deepest well on the estate. That very afternoon, he placed Ravenwood Manor on the market and moved into a modern city apartment. Yet his life was forever altered. To this day, Arthur refuses to keep a single mirror, polished silver dish, or glass-framed painting in his home. Because sometimes, when he washes his hands at night and stares into the dark standing water of the basin, he can still see a smirk looking back at him from beneath the surface. Thank you for surviving another night with Dark Tales. If these stories chilled your spine, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another nightmare. Keep your lights on, stay safe, and try to sleep well tonight, if you can. Good night.